Perfect. Oh, hello, everybody. Yeah. Unfortunately, I cannot be there in present, so I'm participating here from Peru. It's still very early in the morning, but that's okay. So unfortunately, I did miss some talks in the morning because it's just 6 in the morning. So I wanted to share a little some slices, but I'm not sure how this is possible from here. Because I've entered from my phone, because I'm here reading on my laptop, so I entered from the phone, so that's a little bit complicated for me.
Oh, okay. But so you're using the phone.
Perhaps the easiest thing is that I will quick enter from my laptop, so I think that would be the easiest way.
Yes, thanks.
Give me just 30 seconds. Sorry.
Oh. So we will slightly cut short lunch just so we can talk to each other. I appreciate that 50 minutes is a bit tight, but yeah, we won't get to discuss everything we want to otherwise. We will cut short. We will cut lunch by 10 minutes. Yes, fine. Still trying to get through. It's going to the end.
Filling the gap.
So, hello, you can hear me now? It's okay, the audio?
We have control. Okay, you should now have sharing control.
Okay, I will try it. I just put like 3 or 4 slices, very brief, because I'm very nervous about this thing. That my problem is if when I talk or start talk about these themes, I lose like perception of time and I talk too much. So okay, I prepared very few slices, so to really concentrate on the main topic of my speech, which is the universal animal reason as the active principle of human nature, where I try to use Ilnkov's philosophy in order to reconceptualize certain theories which are very dominant in Amazon anthropology. So this is also like, I think, a little bit a problem that the topic of Amazonian anthropology seems to be very far away from the classical, let's say, topics that are around Ilnkov, and it could seem very strange that how Ilnkov could inform Amazonian anthropology, but there's a connection. I try to explain it. I try to really concentrate on the fact, but I will have to. It will be difficult to go very much into details. So I hope that details or the things that will not be clear at the end can be clarified with the questions. So I will. You can see now my screen.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank very much to the organizers of the symposium. I'm very grateful to be able to share with you my ideas on my own anthropological investigations. I always shared the paper, and I shared also a video. That is also the problem. My video should be 10 minutes. It lasted at the end 20 minutes. So this is very a problem of mine, that it is very difficult to explain these things very briefly. But there's a there's a philosophical theory, you could say philosophical, this is anthropological, but it's really like a epistemological theory, very dominant in anthropology and really, really dominant in Amazonian anthropology, which is the ontological turn. I'm sure you have heard of it. And in the ontological turn, there are different perspectives, there are different authors, but I focused my paper very much on Philippe Descola. Philippe Descola, he's a scholar of anthropology at the University of l'École des Hautes Études des Sciences Sociales in Paris, and also the Collège de France. And he is the like the continuer of Claude Lévi-Strauss. Claude Lévi-Strauss has been his doctor father, so he's originally a philosopher, so he has a philosophical background as also as Claude Lévi-Strauss. So he is one of the only, or he is maybe the only anthropologist who is part of this loose group of the ontological turn in anthropology, who really try to present an epistemological foundation to its theory, because you have other representatives which are perhaps more known and also more extravagant, like Eduardo Ribeiro Castro and all these. So but Descola is the only one who really tries to present an epistemological foundation. And as I tried to explain in the paper, his epistemological foundation, is really a schematism, which is inspired by Kantian schematism. This is because also Lévi-Strauss, who also was one of the first anthropologists to not only study the different cultures, but really wanted to systemize the whole of the different cultural, or the underlying logic of these different cultures. He has also based his theories on this schematism. For Claude Lévi-Strauss, these schemas are really built into our cognitive apparatus. So it's very similar to perhaps Chomsky's approach to language, where we have like a pre-established somatic apparatus which tends us to think in a certain way. So as Descola is not a structuralist, but yes, post-structuralist, so he tries to avoid all kind of biological explanations. So these schemata ends up of being just he calls it the result of a socialization process. But that is really a problem, because if you want to explain the underlying logic of socialization, you cannot explain it by schematas which are already results of the socialization. So there's not really an explanation, a really consistent explanation where these schemata comes from. He just said that these schemata exist, and every culture has or operates in their own with their own schematas, and are creating their own rationalization of the environment based on these schematas. So this is really he ends up then claiming that all these different cultures are ontologies. Well, you can debate. This is very debatable if this is really ontology. There's a lot of discussion about that. What the anthropologists call ontologies is slightly different from what in philosophy we call ontology. So but let's say that these ontologies, which are, I think you can really, it's justified to speak of ontologies, because at the end, it's the totality which they are creating. It's the totality where they live in, a conceptual totality, because they rationalize the environment based on these ideas. And so every culture lives in its own ontology. It's you get it like a psychological Kantianism, and these ontologies end up of being like a certain, like a monad, like a Leibnizian monad. So this is also a feature of the ontological turn. Every culture is like a like a monade. I don't know how you call it in English. Like this monade is like a closed circle. So all the cultures are in mutual incommensurable. So this is a very strange, but very hegemonic view nowadays in, in anthropology. So Descola ends up of giving like 4 classes of ontologies, and we could, according to Descola, classify all different cultures in the world according to these 4 uh, 4 classes of ontologies, whether it is animism, totemism, naturalism, and analogism. I will focus just on animism, which you can find, for example, in the Amazonian, but also in Siberia and different parts, and which would be uh, characterized by a similarity of interiorities and differences in physicalities. For example, Amazonian cultures, they ascribe personality, human personality traits to different animals. So they can communicate with with different animals, with monkeys, with, not directly. That's why there's the shaman who then takes ayahuasca or different psychological, psychotropic drugs, and then can communicate with these animals. So why can't we communicate directly in our daily life with these animals? Because there are differences in our physicalities. So this would, but animism is based on the idea that basically all different animals and plants have this underlying human, let's say, mind. Right? In the contrast of this, it would be naturalism, which Descola ascribes to what would be the modern capitalist society, the Western society, which is we have differences in interiorities, yeah. So we do not share any psychological or spiritual traits with animals, but we have similarities in physicalities. That's basically the theory of evolution, that we have basically the same or very similar somatic structure. So I will not go into it. You can already discuss very much of this, because also already this year that just the differentiation between interiorities and physicalities is very problematic, because when an indigenous of the Amazon talks about physicalities, is he really talking about the same thing as we do? So we talk about like no similarities in physicalities. We are talking about, I don't know, like a molecular and perhaps structural similarities. Indigenous in the Amazon obviously make reference to very different things when they talk about physicality. So I think it's already difficult and problematic, this scheme, and in making this differentiation. But nonetheless, there's a point to it. So my intention is to explain with Ilnkov why is it that different? Because this is an explanation which the scholar at the end is not able to give. Why is it that in all the Amazon basin, all these different cultures, because we have hundreds of different groups in the Amazon, but they are all animists. So yeah, I think this is an important point to make. Why is this so? No? This is the second slide. Marshall Salins, which is an anthropologist, an American anthropologist, like the father of let's say, evolutionary or neo-evolutionary anthropology, he revised Descolas' work, and he presented a different scheme. So there's not 4 different independent groups which exist on their own and which are mutually incommensurable. You say it like this, incommensurable in well, but yeah, but there would be more like the underlying logic to it. So Salins presents animism So you can see above there's personhood, or he talks about anthropomorphism. So animism is the the ontology which has the most anthropomorphism to it, because it describes personalities of human personhood to almost everything, to almost every animal, to all the plants, etc. Then you have totemism, which is already a little bit less. You have less personhood. So you see there is like a, a, a decreasing personhood throughout analogism. He then also calls a different, we're not going into detail, the default anthropomorphism. And then there's naturalism at the end, which are we, the human, the Western, the moderns. And in our perception, in our ontology, in our ways of thinking, there's no personhood anymore. So we are just rationals in the sense. So I think this scheme is very interesting because it gives you like an explanatory background, which is important. Why is it that animism, or what could be the explanation that animism is has so much personhood to it, and that there's a decreasing personhood in the different ontologies? Well, I drove. If you see the Descola, he explains perception by these schemes. So this is a very contemplative reason. So he analyzes the Amazon and different cultures based on a very passive and contemplative reason. So I took the well, it's really coming from Hegel, from Marx, but I think Ilnkov is explaining it and is putting it out very clear that reason is action. No, reason is subjective action, not the subject by the individual, meant the individual, but the collective subject and its activity. And we have to take the activity of the collective, the activity of the group, as the basic element in function to which we should analyze the whole reasoning process, because reason is uh, only a very specific form of action, of practice. So practice is combined physical action and also the ideal action. So the ideal is somehow mediating the action, the activity of the group, sorry, not action, the activity of the group in response to the natural forces surrounding. So here you have an explanation by Descola, or an explanation because he thinks that there's no ecological reason, or we should not try to derive these ontologies from the ecological circumstances, because he says, yeah, all Amazon cultures are animists, but also all Siberian cultures are animists. So this would be proof enough to say, while the Amazon is this wild, super abundant and diverse ecosystem, and the taiga, the Siberian taiga, is in our imaginary like the contrast to it. There's just no diversity in the taiga. It is very monotone. It is just white. It is just a very simple structured ecosystem. So this would be proof enough to say that we cannot fix these ontologies somehow on the environment. And I think he's right to that in the sense that you cannot, and this is, I think, the basic insight from dialectical philosophy, that you cannot just contrast ecosystem with thought, but there is a mediating factor, which is the activity, which is the collective activity. And I think when you take Ilyenkov's conception of the activity, then you see that the differences between the Amazon and the Siberian taiga just vanish. It is practically, for human activity, very similar, because also in the Amazon, I explained it in the paper. It's in our imaginary the land of milk and honey. There's very there's abundance, there are very much animals, there are fish, there are fruits on every tree, and this is a very false perception. The Amazon is in fact a very poor environment, a very misanthropic environment for human life. It is very difficult to survive in the Amazon. That is why all Amazon cultures are also very small, very dispersed living societies, because there's just very little resources to live on. So in this, and the other thing is that in the Amazon, you have not the possibility to increase um, demographics based on agriculture, because there's just not enough agriculture production possible so that you can expand the demographics. And the animals in the Amazon are also all very small, they are very dispersed, and um, there are no animals that you could there are no domestic animals. So very much the same is happening in the taiga, in the Siberian taiga. You have also a very misanthropic environment. Uh, you have uh, you have bigger animals, but you have to subordinate. This is the same thing in the Amazon and the taiga. You have these collectives. The activity of the collective is characterized by a need to subordinate the social activity to the reproductive activities of other ecological factors, mainly on the other animals. That's why, for example, Amazon cultures have to leave so much forest intact, because you just need that these animals reproduce themselves in this forest, so you can hunt them, and there's nothing you can do about increasing the animals. And more or less the same is true for the Siberia, or the taiga in general. So I think this is important. I just took out two quotes of Ilnkov. I explained it in more details in the paper, and I think it's interesting that Ilnkov, without knowing the ontological term, which would come out like 30 years after his death, he already responded somehow to the claim of these schemata. No? When he says, all general images, however, without exception, neither sprang from universal schemas of a work of thought, nor rose from an act of passive contemplation of nature, unsullied by man, but took shape in the course of its practical, objective transformation by man, by society. So this is very much, I think it's very interesting. This sentence really much is a clear response to to all the efforts of the ontological turn, because they try to explain all these different cultures exactly by ascribing to all human nature these passive contemplation of nature. So they try to understand why different cultures think about nature, how they do it. Well, it's like I don't know how they imagine how this is going on. That the indigenous are just looking at the different uh, ecological phenomena, and then it, like a scientist somehow trying to make sense of all of it. So it's very different, because um, it's really the social practice from which the reason of these ontologies is extracted. So if you connect the ontologies to the activity of the collective, it makes very much sense why certain groups are, for example, animists, why others are totemists, and why, for example, the moderns, we have very little anthropomorphism in our thought schemes. So I try to complete the scheme um, of Marshall Salin here with the above stated. You can more or less say that animism, as for example the cultures in the Amazon and also in Siberia, in North America, are not able to interfere transformatively in their ecosystem. So this is also very Hegelian. Hegel, for example, states that the natural religion is the religion of those people whose forms of reflectiveness is orientated directly to natural forces. So this is, I think Hegel has a very good point here. So animism is, you can find animism in all the cultures where the social collective is not able to transform their ecosystem, and they have to subordinate to the other natural forces. Why? When collectives are more and more able to transform their ecosystem, which means they are going to, Ilnkov calls it the materialization of social life. So we are transforming the ecosystem, the system in which we live. So our ecosystem is becoming more and more anthropogenic. Like look at Europe, look at England. It is very clear that the ecosystem of Europe has been profoundly modified by our historical action. So more and more the ecosystem is getting anthropogenic, more and more anthropomorphism or personhood decreases. I think this is something which is very interesting. You can derive from Ilyenkov's ideas. So I hope it has been clear what I just presented to you. I don't know if I have more time to speak about naturalism, or if I leave it here to the questions. I will.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, we'll leave it at questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Martin. Really stimulating paper and a really interesting thesis. Could you give a specific anthropological example of how a form of life activity either affects the kind of concepts with which culture is operating, or more simply, of how animism is manifested? Stop sharing. Yeah, if you could stop sharing as well, that would be great.
I didn't get that very well.
Okay, so can you give a specific anthropological example of how the form of life activity is affecting the kind of concepts that a culture is operating with, or to say a bit about how this animism actually is manifested?
Yes, I can explain it. I try to explain it briefly. But also, sorry for my English. It is very complicated for me to speak in English, but I give my best. So, for example, Amazonian animism. I draw here in, well, this is a book project which I'm working on. So there's very much explanation, which I think is needed to get this very specifically. But I draw here very much on Michael Tomasello, who's describing human reason as actually is basically social. So the first, it is also you can see that the first how you say, the first triumphs from Homo sapiens about other sapiens was not necessarily due our superior ability to create artifacts or something like that, but we are very much, and our social life, our vital activity of the humans is very much characterized by a very good, how you call it, ability to create social collaboration. So we collaborate very well, way better than, for example, our ancestors, the primates, and all the others. And I think this is very crucial to understand our reason and also animism. So if you can see that here there's already like which could be problematic. There's an evolutionary argument to it. So we could also argue that animism is like a form of very basic evolution of reason, and reason uh, is developing by ex, ex, excluding more and more personhood from its dynamics. But if in animism, I think the interesting thing is that animism is a form of trying to collaborate with other natural phenomena. So it is very much the expansion. If our reasoning process is primarily social, and the first in, or human reason is basically social in the sense that we are achieving a better interaction with the natural forces throughout a better collaboration. So animism is an intent to start collaborating with natural forces, really. This is inclusive. David Graeber in his last books is making some points on this. So you have very clear logical material limits to your life in the Amazon, for example. So you cannot domesticate animals. You cannot further penetrate, let's say, the nature. So you cannot expand the classical way of interfering with the natural forces. So what I understand animism is, for example, animism is very crucial to animism is shamanism. So shamanism is a way to which the shaman takes some psychotropic drugs and then tries to convince the animals, or the how you call it, the master of the forest, is like spiritual beings, to give them more praise, more animals. So you really can see that animism is an intent to convince the other animals to like to expand socialization, the human socialization to other phenomena. In order to do it, you need that the other animals, that the other phenomena are able to understand your socialization. So you ascribe to them personhood. So this is possible. But in order, if you going to control more and more the natural forces, then you don't need anymore this personhood. So you already control the animal. We do not need to project human personality to a cow, because we can perfectly control the cow. So we don't need to personalize it. That's more or less the underlying logic.
Thank you. Very quickly, so we really don't have a lot of time. So Yanis, and then if anyone hasn't asked a question yet, then we'll finish with someone who hasn't asked a question yet. But Yanis first.
Hello, Martin. Congratulations. I really enjoy your speech. So I'm a bit familiar with your topic and with Philippe Descolla's approach. One question that it seems to me very important with the Philippe Descolla's approach is that from the point of view of Marxism, I believe that he underestimates and he ignores the factor of production. Because from the Marxist point of view, the explanation of the various phenomena, although with a not simplistic way or with a mechanistic way, but in the explanation of various cultural phenomena such as animism, totemism, and so on, must be also grounded the consideration of the production, namely the process of labor and the way that each community stays alive through their interaction with a natural environment. And my question is, if you share this conception, if you think that Philippe Descolla's approach, if you think that he considers the fact of labor, the factor of production in his consideration of the various cultural phenomena. Thank you so much.
Yeah, very. Thank you, Janice, for the question. Yeah, I think he does more or less, because he formulates many critics of Marxism, which give you an idea that Descola has a very weird conception of Marxism. He also don't understand dialectics. If you see Claude Lévi-Strauss and Descola's critics of dialectics, for them dialectics are always too like hot and cold, and the mediation between hot and cold is like dialectic. This is a very simplistic way of conceiving dialectics. So this is very limited, I think, perception. And Descola, he claims, are presented in the paper which I shared with you, that, for example, these schematas produce identification and then relation. So it's more or less he's saying these people, the different cultures, first create their ontologies, and then they go into interrelation with different phenomena in the environment. So the ontology is produced independently, autonomously from the production process. Only after a culture has already formed out its ontology, it then tries to establish a productive mode, so to say. So I think this is really, that David Graeber said that this is not only idealism, it's the idealism in its most extreme form. It's a very rare weird conception. Yeah, I think Descola gets that very. It's very contrast, because Marx said it's the social being and what we do, which ultimately affects how we think about the world. In Descola, it's the other way around. We think first of the phenomena of the world, and then we act on them. It's very strange. It's very idealistic.
Okay, and last from Isabel. Okay, so Isabel for the last one, and then we're off to lunch until 10:02.
Okay, very quick one then. So thanks. I found it very compelling to think about anthropology with Ilnkov. A few things I found problematic as well. So first I was thinking, is it really the absence of interference with the ecosystem if instead of extracting or exploiting the ecosystem, you have strategies of collaboration or maybe of joining forces? And I think it's for me, very difficult to imagine a kind of human activity which is entirely detached from its environment, or this idea of like a separation because the absence of exploitative mechanisms. So maybe you could expand on that. The other one is the idea of animism. I was thinking, rather than only a methodological tool, is there maybe also a deeper connection between certain indigenous systems of belief or systems of thoughts that you study and Ilnkov's ideas on these topics? Is there a more intricate relation between the two that you might use in your work, or that you might have thought about before?
Oh yeah, thank you, Isabel, for this interesting question. Yeah, it's exploiting. I don't understand very much yeah, it's this. Descola creates its conception very much in absence of these, I don't know if you call it interfering with the natural phenomena, exploitation. The last part of my paper, I try to explain also, because Descola, the point of Descola is ultimately to show that we in our modern society has like a separation or a mindset where nature and the social, like culture, are more or less two different, let's say, spheres of interaction. So he claims, and I think he's right there, that we are the only culture which has that, and that in all these other culture ontologies, in analogism, totemism, and animism, nature cannot be. So nature is social, and the social is nature. But he's not giving a very good explanation of it, and I think philosophically it would be very important to show why then we, the West, are we the only ontology or the only culture which separates the natural from the social? And I think you also already pointed it out, by that our interference with the nature of exploiting also implies exploiting human labor. So we have like a double division in our perception, and in order to be able to relate it then to Marx, concept of alienation in order to be able to treat other humans as they were just natural resources. We then make this differentiation between the social and the natural, and then, for example, as the slaves during the 16th and 17th century, we then are able to treat other humans as human resources. Because black slaves were treated like, I don't know, you went to Africa, you exploited gold and other stuff, and also humans, but they were treated like parts of the environment. So I think this is the characteristic of our. So I would not call our modern ontology, if you want to call it like that, naturalism, because it's not naturalism, but it's more it's capitalism. So this is very important to understand our own perception. In between animism and other forms of Ilnkov's, well, I try to explain it briefly that I think animism, shamanism, is crucial to animism, because the shaman is the intermediator between the group and the other life forms. So the mediation which the shaman does is always like, you have this in the Siberian and you have this in the Amazon animism, that the animals of the forests are the property of a spiritual being, and the shaman then negotiates when he takes his drugs, and in the Siberian they take this mushrooms and all that. So then they negotiate with these spiritual beings, convincing him that he will give them more prey, more meat. So this is more or less, you see that animism and also the whole spiritual and religious system has, it seems that this is very reductionistic, what I'm trying to explain, but also this is also, you can also comprehend the religion and the animist religion and mythology in order to, you have to understand first the production mode of them. As they are not able to domesticate animals, so then they try to negotiate it with the natural forces. This is more or less and I think drawing from Ilnkov, you can formulate this very, very clear.
Thank you very much, Martin.